Calvin Coolidge entered politics right away. And he was, just right after getting his law degree, went into practice and then quickly became a Massachusetts legislator. And then eventually the governor of Massachusetts, and then surprisingly was picked to be the vice president of the United States. And then, as he was visiting his family farm, President Harding died suddenly of a heart attack, and word got to Calvin Coolidge that he was now the president of the United States. His father, who was a public notary and justice of the peace, actually administered the oath in the living room, and President Coolidge went back to bed. And then the next day, went to Washington, D.C. to have the oath administered by a Supreme Court justice. He had to deal with Harding's scandals. Harding, if you know anything about Warren G. Harding, was not a great president. He had a lot of cronies around him who made a lot of trouble for him. And so Coolidge had to deal with those, but he was also a very different person, known as Silent Cal. He was just a man of very few words. Interesting, he was the one that really first started to use the medium of the radio to get his message out. So, someone who is silent, there's a lot that he's done on the radio that we can have. Now, he had two sons, John and Calvin Jr., and they did not live at the White House. They were going to school somewhere else, but then they would come in the summer and on weekends and whenever they could on holidays and visit his father. And there was one day, June 30th, 1924, that his sons came to the White House and they were playing tennis. Calvin Jr. didn't wear socks on his shoes, didn't wear socks, and so as they were playing, developed this blister on his toe. Now, for you and I, that wouldn't be a big deal at all because we have penicillin, we have other things to fight infection, but that blister got infected. And even though they took Calvin Jr. to Walter Reed Medical Center, he died 7 days later. He got sepsis, he got blood poisoning, and died. And Coolidge was devastated. He was running for president. Again, the election would be at the end of that year, but just kind of quit the campaign. Still won re-election, but he said this, when he went, the power and the glory of the presidency went with him. He just did not care. This whole cloud of the loss of his son in the White House was something that was too much for him. In fact, he said at some point, we do not know what might have happened to him under other circumstances, but if I had not been the president, he would not have raised a blister on his toe, which resulted in the blood poisoning playing lawn tennis in the South grounds. So he always thought about that, if only I had become president, and that just kind of shaded everything. So then 4 years later, they wanted him to run again. He said, I am not going to run for president, and he went into retirement quietly, worked on his autobiography, and eventually passed off the scene. Grief and loss are serious parts of life, and we will all go through that at some point, loss. It can be the deepest valley that you'll ever go through, and you know this, I hope, that God doesn't always take that away. He doesn't always just say, well, this is a hard thing for you, and so I'm just not going to make you go through it. Now, won't it be wonderful when we get to heaven to find out all the things that God didn't make us go through? All the things that God spared us from and all the ways that God just helped us in those little areas. But the truth is that we are living in a world where people are going to die and we are going to experience loss and loss in relationships, loss through death, whatever it is, but we're going to go through hard things, and especially in death. H. Norman Wright wrote a book called Experiencing Grief when he lost his son. And he said this, when you enter into grief, you enter into the valley of shadows. There is nothing heroic or noble about grief. It is painful. It is work. It is a lingering process, but it is necessary for all kinds of losses. It has been labeled everything from intense mental anguish to acute sorrow to deep remorse. He mentions the valley of shadows, but in the valley of shadows, I'm glad to tell you, there is a shepherd. In fact, one of the most famous Psalms, Psalm 23, verse 4, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Last week, we looked at the death of the prince, Absalom. He had mounted a coup against his father, David, We're going through the life of David here on Sunday mornings, and Absalom had tried to go take an army and find his father David, would have killed him, would have probably done what eventually happened to him, but instead, as the army lost and Absalom tried to run away, he got his head caught in a tree, and Joab, the commander, found him and killed him. Joab was the one that made that decision to have him killed. He determined that it would be cleaner and more necessary. He felt probably that David's mind and focus and priorities were skewed by the fact that this was his son, and so made an executive decision, literally. So David is wanting to hear good news of the war and of this coup, but also he wants to hear about Absalom. And it's a really kind of obscure story, one that you're probably not very aware of. One that you probably, as you're reading through the story, you just kind of go by and you don't really think much of it. But there's a lot here, actually. This is probably the most intensive passage on all the things concerning grief. And I'm not trying to pull out of it something that's not there, but I want you to see what is there and give you some help in this. So, first of all, I want to talk about delivering the message of loss. There's this puzzling story about the two runners who have to go tell David, because David has to know. No one can text him, no one can call him. So someone has to literally run the news to David. And according to, here in 2 Samuel chapter 18, look at verse number 19. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, remember Zadok is the priest, Ahimaaz and Jonathan were two of the people that went and told David, hey, get out of here. Hushai has prophesied or has given bad advice, and this is your one chance to get away. So that's Ahimaaz, and he's now with them. He's gone onto the battlefield with Joab. There's no record that he fought, but at least he's there. And he says, let me now run and bear the king tidings, how that the Lord hath avenged him of his enemies. He said, let me run, let me go tell David. Joab said unto him, thou shalt not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt bear no tidings, because the king's son is dead. He's like, this needs a little bit of delicacy. So I'm not going to have you go right now. Now, what Joab is thinking, we just don't know. We have these words, and that's it. So we don't know a lot of what's going on here. But he sends instead, just gives the name Cushai. A Cushite is like a Sudanese man. So just a man from Africa, who was there with the army and apparently a very fast runner, and that was his job. He would go and deliver messages. So then said Joab to Cushai, go tell the king what thou hast seen. And Cushai bowed himself unto Joab and ran. But Ahimaaz insists on running anyway. Verse 22, then said Ahimaaz the son of Zadok yet again to Joab, but howsoever, let me, I pray thee, run after Cushai. And Joab said, wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing thou hast no tidings ready? But howsoever, said he, let me run. And he said unto him, run. I mean, just kind of dismissively, right? Fine. Just actually, yes, run. Run away from me. You're annoying me. Run, go. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and overran Cushai. So Ahimaaz outruns, he gets there first. Now again, so if you think about the Bible as a movie, because it's the thing that we're kind of most familiar with. Have you ever watched a movie or something, and maybe it's a kind of a mystery, or maybe there's some kind of intrigue, and the camera's following some character, and then it just kind of stops and like focuses on something, and you watch the movie, and you're like, they want us to know something about what's going on here. They're trying to tell us something. I'm going to need that for later, right? And so the same thing with the Bible. The Bible goes pretty quick. There's a whole lot of stuff that we just don't know anything about. And the Bible's like, and then there were these two guys, and one really wanted to run. And we say, what's going on here? Why is the camera just stopping like this? Why is the writer staying on this theme so much? I mean, obviously because it happened, but there's a lot of stuff happened that didn't get into the Bible. I mean, John says if everything that had been written about Jesus had been written, it'd fill up the whole world. So why did this get in here? And this is a tough thing that most commentators are kind of like, it's just kind of a story. But I think I have some insight as to what is going on here, or at least why the Lord allowed it. So Cushai takes off, and he goes the way a different way, doesn't say, but Ahimaaz ran the way of the plain, which presumably was a longer way, but the footing was a little better, so he could go, and he gets there first. So in verse 24 then, David sat between the two gates. He's waiting in Mahanaim, waiting for news, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate under the wall and lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king, and the king said, if he be alone, there's tidings in his mouth. It's not an army coming after us. It's not a sortie, so it must be somebody with news. So he came apace and drew near, and the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called unto the porter and said, behold, another man running alone. And the king said, he also bringeth tidings. And the watchman said, methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, he's a good man, and cometh with good tidings. And Ahimaaz called and said unto the king, all is well. He's delivered his message. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king and said, blessed be the Lord thy God, which hath delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. So he gives the good news. Hey, you don't have to run. This is not a pack your bags and let's get out of here. You can stay. We've won. All those who are against you have been subdued. But look at where David's mind is. Verse 29, the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? Right away. Okay, fine, good. But how about Absalom, my son? Is he safe? Is he okay? He knows there's a victory, but he's unsure about how Absalom has fared, and this has really been weighing heavily on him. Now again, what's going on here? Scholars are confused. I think, this is my theory, all right? So if it wasn't for the camera, I'd step out to the side of the pulpit, but this is my theory. I think that Ahimaaz wanted to give David a moment to process the news and the loss and to kind of prepare himself for what he was going to hear next. Because Ahimaaz knows that Cushai is going to come. And Cushai, he doesn't care for David like Ahimaaz does. Ahimaaz is part of kind of the administration and family. And I think we'll find out when we get to heaven. I think he just wanted to give David a moment to process this and to at least entertain the possibility, okay, if the army has prevailed, then it's possible that Absalom is gone. Now, Ahimaaz doesn't tell him that. Notice in verse number 29, Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant and me, thy servant, I saw a great tumult. I knew not what it was. Ahimaaz knows that Absalom's dead because Joab told him, be careful because the king's son is dead. I don't think Ahimaaz is afraid to tell him. I think he just says, there was a lot going on. There was a big tumult, and I didn't see what was going on. So he just kind of leaves it there. It's nebulous. There's bad news. It's not good for Absalom, but there's just that moment. It was enough for him to know that there was something wrong. Cushai would come and tell the news. In verse 30, the king said unto him, turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and stood still. Behold, Cushai came, and Cushai said, tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. And again, verse 32, the king said unto Cushai, is the young man Absalom safe? Now, Cushai doesn't have the same pathos that Ahimaaz does. And so he answers, this is business. The enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. He's dead. He's dead, and Cushai's maybe even reveling in that a little bit. And I wish all your enemies were like that guy your son is. He's gone. I've seen, personally, God's grace in giving bad news. Maybe you've experienced it. I wish I could be specific with some of the stories that I have. And I'm not going to be able to look at Amy. But there was, you all know, because it was 10 years ago, there was a situation in the church where I had to go and tell some just beloved people in the church that they had lost someone very special to them, very special to me. And the wife was not at home. We knew where she was. She was at work, and so we had to go to the workplace and say, hey, can we go over to the church? There's been an accident, and we just need to talk to you. And She had a lot of questions that I wasn't going to answer. Kind of like a Hema, just enough for me to put her off and to say, we'll talk about it. I did say, your boys are safe, and so it's fine. And I think that was the biggest thing for her. But in between where she worked and the drive here to go sit in my office so that I could tell her the worst news, she later said she was really thankful for that drive because she knew it was bad, and she knew that it was just that moment to get her ready to hear it. And there's just a lot of little funny things like that. Even other people that were involved in that situation, that when they came through, they saw fire trucks at the fire station but hadn't been deployed. They were just sitting there kind of on the ready, and they knew that something was wrong. You see fire trucks all the time maybe, but there was something about, they just knew something was wrong. It was enough for them to have, by God's grace, just that little moment to prepare themselves. And I've just seen that over and over again. I had a death notification that we had to give. I didn't put all together who it was, but when I was told the young man had died, we went to the address, and it was actually the grandmother. And when I realized who it was that we had to go tell the mother, it was a very hard thing. We had to go to her house. But somehow she had called her mom, and her mom said, just stay where you are. And that was enough for her to say, okay, bad news is coming. Something's not right. And I think I know what it is. And again, just God's grace in that moment to give her just a moment to prepare herself. I've talked with some friends about this, that when the bad news is coming but not here yet, you get to live in this little fantasy land for just a moment where it could be it's something else. It could be just like, have you heard the stock market crashed? Or have you heard, I bought a new car? It could be any number of things. We tell ourselves it doesn't have to be that. It could be something else. It could be anything else. It could be something that doesn't have anything to do with me at all, but it could be that, and it probably is. And God just gives you, I can't explain it. I just know that God gives you a little something there to help prepare you. And what a grace. When you get upset with God for allowing that thing to happen, can you look for those little moments where he was with you? You're like, oh, you have to go through this. It's my will, it's my plan for you to walk through this valley, but just know that I'm with you. And I know that you have to go through it, and I'm sorry, but it has to be this way. But I'm going to walk you through it. And there's just these little moments that he gives. And if you're looking for them, you'll find them. And if you choose to be bitter against God, then you'll miss them completely. And you won't get all the comfort that you need. God has thousands of those little graces. This is maybe not helpful at all. Hopefully you'll never have to use this, but I have been trained as a chaplain how to give death notifications and bad news. And can I say that while some people enjoy giving bad news, I do not understand those kind of people. I hate it. I hate giving bad news. But I have learned if you ever have to give bad news, this is totally separate, not biblical at all, but it's wise. Go, first of all, in person. If you can, give bad news in person, never over the phone. If you have to, you have to, especially just the world we're living in. But if you can be there, it just means a lot more. God designed us to, when you get something from a person, to have that. That matters. Second, do it in time. Do it as quickly as you can. Again, especially in a world where social media can beat you to that. People start asking you, is it true what I heard, before you're able to tell anybody. A couple years ago, when I found our sister Lorraine passed away at her house, the first place I went I had to call her daughter. She was in the cities, and she knew it was coming, probably. But the first place I went was to see Carol Worster. And I'm like, Carol, I've just got some bad news for you. And sat down and told her, because I didn't want her to find some other way, and I just wanted her to know about that. Third is go in pairs. I went by myself to see Carol because I could, but generally you want someone else who can be there with you. And whenever I go do a death notification, I'm always trying to see, is there a pastor I can call who can come and be with you and help you, but we always try to do that in pairs. It's just easier. Fourth, to use plain language. It might sound really blunt to say, this person you love is dead, but that it really is the best way because, again, we grab onto every little hope that we can. If you say, we lost him, people are going to think, irrationally, we'll go find him. Did he wander off? And you laugh, but that's what we think because we're looking for any little strand of hope we can get. Or if you say, they're gone, where did they go? Don't say that. They're home with the Lord. Okay, that's a little better, but people just, it's okay to say, if you have to give bad news, I'm sorry, but there was an accident and this person is dead. That's the way you have to give this news. And then fifth, with compassion. Most of us don't know what to say in these kinds of things. I'll talk about that later, but be compassionate with your news, understanding how hard it is for them, even if you don't fully understand. Sometimes we're called to be bearers of bad tidings, and it's hard, but part of the healing process you can enter into right away, even in the way that news is delivered. And the news has to be delivered to them. It just has to be. In our county, it's usually the police, and they don't like it either. And that's why me as a chaplain, I can go and be with them when they deliver that news and even do it for them. So that's what's going on here. David hears his son is dead. Now I want to talk about the grieving response, because David immediately reacts to this news, even though I think he knew it was coming. He's now he understands what happened. Look at verse 33. The king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Similarly, in chapter 19, verse 4, the king covered his face and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." David cries out for his son. It takes three parts. First, it's a lamentation. He's crying out for his son, "Oh, my son Absalom." There's also regret. "Would to God that I had died for thee." And there's also the physical reaction. There's the retreat, the loud mourning, the covering his face. He doesn't want to be around people. He doesn't want to be where he can be seen, but he can obviously be heard. All of these are very normal. And if you ever find yourself at the other end of bad news and you react in this way, just know, yep, that's normal. That's okay. I know sometimes we feel like, I gotta keep it together for somebody else, and there's time for that, absolutely. I know sometimes we feel like, I gotta be stoic. I gotta hold it together. Sometimes you do. Like when you're preaching a message, somebody got to pull it together, man. But it's okay when things are really sad to just be like, this is sad. And I'm going to react in the way that my body's telling me to react. God made you that way, and that's okay. Why was his mourning like this? Because, we all know, we all saw, even the stuff that, David didn't know at the time, but we know now through the inspired scripture of just the way that Absalom was. Going on the rooftop, and he was going to kill his father. He was not a good guy. What's going on here with David? I think when we mourn, we do the same thing. First of all, he's facing a future without his son. There was no time to speak to him. I don't know what his last words to Absalom were. It's probably very cavalier. Just like when Absalom went off, he said, "Oh yeah, you're going to go shear sheep. Have fun." And then Amnon's dead and Absalom's in exile. Absalom eventually comes back, but what were the last words? We don't know. David has regret maybe, but he's without a son. He's also facing a future where his son never repented. And that's hard because he just doesn't know, did he die in his sins? Did he ever have a chance to make it right? We all know from the inspired scripture, no, he didn't. No, there was no remorse. There was nothing like that with him. He went into the grave with hatred in his heart for his father. There's always those questions. Again, I got called out 10 years ago to a place in the area. So a family from the cities were up, and they were four-wheeling and doing some other things. And the son came over a hill. Sun was in his eyes. He didn't see the tree right in front of him. Hit the tree and died instantly. They brought an ambulance and everything out, but there was nothing that could be done for him. And I got called out to go and meet with this family. It wasn't a death notification because they were right there, but to meet with this family. I got there, I think, at like 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. It might have been earlier than that. Stayed till 2 a.m. I walked with them as they had to call their daughters and say, your brother's gone. But one of the things I remember from that whole interaction, more than anything, was, and we're always pretty careful about, I'll talk about this later, but giving like a sermon. I mean, it's what I do, but it's just you don't do that all the time in really inappropriate times for it. And so they're saying they said to me, we're really concerned about where our son is right now. We don't know if he was right with God. And I said, yeah, those are tough questions you're going to be asking yourself over the next week or so. I didn't know them. I can't give them any kind of assurances, right? What do you say? And I remember them both with hurt in their eyes, clinging to each other, staring me down, saying, no, we want to know. Where is he? What do you say? You're like, what did you say? What I said was this: we have no idea what's going on inside the human heart. How many chances we've had to hear the gospel. And I know for many of you, you heard the gospel long before you ever accepted it. You heard that Jesus Christ died for your sins. You heard that all you have to do is believe in him and trust in him, and he'll take all your sins away and give you forgiveness, give you his righteousness. That you have it by faith, not by works. You have it by faith, not by religious things. You heard that maybe before you ever accepted it. They had said that their son had gone to VBS or Sunday school as a little child. And I said, I really believe that God works in hearts and that there's a lot more going on under the surface that we know. Listen, that's no excuse to not give the gospel to people. I'm sure God's working in their heart. It's probably fine. That's not an excuse, but there's hope there because we're looking for every little strand we can. And what I told them was, we don't know in those final moments what's going through someone's mind. I said, I told them this, and I've used this story before, but it's anecdotal, yes, but it was a story about a man who was riding a horse. He was an atheist. And kind of the same scenario where a horse stopped and he went off the horse and hit a tree. And rather than dying, he was in a coma. And he was in a coma for a long, long time. I don't remember the story. Let's say it's 8 months. In the coma, and when he came out of it, he was a believer in Jesus Christ. And they asked him, when did you trust Christ? He said, when I was thrown off the horse. It was like time slowed down. And I had a moment to think about everything. And I realized that if I were to die, I would be in hell. And I trusted Christ right there. From the horse to the tree, I trusted Christ. It's anecdotal, but listen, those little things, we don't know how God comes and meets with people in those moments. And so that's what I told them. But that's a real fear. What's going on? Did this person ever repent? Did they ever hear? Did they ever understand? And it's a wonderful thing when you get that assurance. When on their deathbed, they say, I'm believing, I'm trusting Christ. I've seen that. I hope for it. And some of the people I'm praying for, but we all think about that. He's also facing a future full of unresolved regret. You remember how this whole thing started? I mean, it kind of started when David and Bathsheba sinned against each other, and then David didn't do anything about Amnon, and maybe if he'd done something, Absalom hadn't killed him, and maybe all the bitterness was David's fault because of everything that happened. There's a lot of regret there, and you can't get it resolved because now Absalom's gone. The hardest part of grief is giving up that future that you can't have. It's packing up all those futures that you could have had. They're all gone now. That's one of the hardest things about grief. It's hard to let go of dreams and hopes that you had and plans for the future. It's hard to finally say that will never happen. So what is good grief? Is this what David's doing right now? Is this good? Is there a bad way to grieve? Good way to grieve? It doesn't matter how you grieve, as long as you grieve. I would say good grief would look like this. First of all, believing the truth about yourself and about God and about your loved one. The truth is always at the center of healing. The truth is always at the center of healing. If you're going to heal from grief, you can't go into all these questions that don't have answers. We ask them, it's part of the process, but you cannot cling on to those unanswered questions. You have to believe the truth about yourself, that you are loved by God, that he does not do anything to bring us down without good reason as a son of God. Romans 8:28, I preached that message when Daniel died 10 years ago. I talked about Romans 8:28 because we're facing this crisis of a man that we all loved was suddenly gone, and what do we do with a verse like Romans 8:28 that says all things work together for good? And we say, man, it just doesn't feel like that. So we have to work through that. So, but do you believe it or not? You have all kinds of questions about how that can be true, but do you believe it? Start with that, right? Like, I'll believe it when I see all these things come together for good. No. That's not the way it goes. It goes like this. You believe, you trust, and then it shows up. If it shows up, you believe it. You believe the truth about yourself, about God, about your loved one. Here, David wishes that God would have killed him instead. God, if you were a good God, you would have taken me instead of him. Well, that wasn't God's plan. Do you believe that God's good, that he's wise, that he knows what he's doing? That when he makes a decision, who he's going to take and who he's going to leave, that he lets some sit in their sin and rescues, amen, others? Yeah, I mean, are you okay with the fact that God grabs some out and shakes them to kind of get them to see themselves, and other people he leaves to their own devices? That's not between you. I mean, that's not you. God didn't ask for your opinion on that. He just makes decisions, and there's free will in there somewhere too. Figure that out. That wasn't God's will. He even sent soldiers to ensure a win. We feel guilty sometimes when we survive, and that's very normal. It should have been me. If only I would have. That's very, very normal. But God decides when we pass, not us. It was not God's will for David to die on the battlefield instead of Absalom. 2, then, accepting help from others around you. We are privileged to be with people that are grieving so we can help teach them the best way forward. When you are going through loss and someone says, how can I help? It's good to have some answers. I know you want to say, I don't know, I just want to go to bed and not think about this. I want to wake up from this bad dream and have it be gone. I know that's what you want to say, but it's okay to say, I don't really want to be around people right now, but it would be really great to have someone around this afternoon. Can you come back at 2? It's okay to say that, right? Or I am not hungry at all, but I know that I should eat. Can you just keep me accountable and make sure that I'm eating something? Maybe you have to do that, but teach them about, this is what I want. Here, David withdrew himself, and the people did not feel welcome. We'll look at this in a moment. We, especially as Americans, try to avoid any hard thing as much as we can. I don't want to do any kind of hard thing, but it is our privilege as Christians to enter into the suffering and hard things of other people so that we might bring Christ into the situation. And that is, it is hard, but God gives grace, and he will multiply the grace, the sacrifice you make into grace to help that other person. Then also, good grief is walking through the process of incorporating that loss into your life. What does life look like now? Normal is gone. The life that I had before, that's gone. It's like I died and there's someone else in its place, someone without that person. I get that, okay? But what does the rest of life now look like? You can't live like your life is on pause because time grinds on, and sometimes it feels like a grind. You have to allow yourself to live the rest of your life. You have to give yourself permission to live the rest of your life. And it's good for us who don't understand all of that, who haven't experienced that kind of loss, to educate ourselves in that. It would be good for you to read a book on grief so that you know how someone else is going through. I mentioned a book, Experiencing Grief by H. Norman Wright. It's a good book. C.S. Lewis wrote an excellent book, A Grief Observed, after he lost his wife. If you want some other titles, I can give them to you. Nels Peterson also has some good titles he can offer you, and that would be really, really helpful for you to just educate yourself so you can be a minister. And I know, like most things, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to climb down into the pit, but people need you to. And you're going to be called on someday to do that, and so it's a good thing. David here is struggling, I think, even with his faith a little bit. He is wishing that God had acted differently. And if we're not careful, that could develop into bitterness and take away our faith. And we as Christians can be used by God to bring them back to faith and a robust relationship with God. So God sends people to help, people like us to help others contextualize. The last thing I want to talk about is the person to help in grief. And let's just say that if you ever have to experience deep grief and sorrow, just pray that someone like Joab doesn't show up. Because Joab hears that David is grieving and he's not happy. He's the commander. He's not sure that the danger's over. Just because Absalom's dead doesn't mean there's not a whole army of people who might be like, well, let's try this again, even without the guy with the long hair. And so the people are defeated. So look at chapter 19. David's weeping and crying. It was told Joab, behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. Verse 2, the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say how that day how the king was grieved for his son. Well, we all kind of thought the king would be happy that we won, but here he is grieving his head off that his rebel son that tried to kill all of us died. Verse 3, the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. Meaning this, instead of the celebration of we won, they all kind of acted like they'd lost. They didn't get to celebrate. They just kind of like, they didn't look at each other. You know, I just imagine them kind of like, just kind of putting their head down and everyone like, I don't know what to do. Like we're in our tents. What do we do? We can't, we're immobilized. The king has to give us some things to do, and what are we going to do? And Joab sees all this and thinks, this is a disaster. What am I going to do about this? He probably doesn't think that Absalom deserves mourning. Absalom had been a threat, and Joab saw it that way, and Joab took care of a problem, simple as that. So he goes to tell David, and he tells him some pretty harsh things. And again, just pray that when you have something like this, that Joab doesn't show up. But is there anything that we can find here in talking to those who are in grief? Let me just read what Joab says, verses 5 to 7. Joab came into the house to the king and said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies, and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. I get the sense that you would have been happy if they would have won and we all would have died. Is that what's going on here? Verse 7, Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. So again, he's had some grief counseling training in the past. Compassionate Joab. But is there anything that we can find here in talking to those who are in grief? First, notice what Joab doesn't say. This is extra biblical, but here it is. Joab doesn't say nothing. He doesn't just leave him to wallow in his own grief. Others are depending on him, and so he needs to step it in. So that's a good thing. Good for Joab for saying something, not nothing, which is what most of us want to do. Say nothing. We don't want to enter into the house of mourning. It's a sad place, but God calls us to. He didn't say nothing. He also, though, didn't use trite phrases like we are all prone to do. Things like, God must have needed an angel. They're in a better place. Everything happens for a reason. Time heals all wounds. Now, are some of those true? Sure. Is there a time for that? Sure. Does it look good on a card? Maybe. We all think that we're helping, but it's best to not say those kind of hallmarky phrases to someone because it comes off as, I don't understand, I'm disconnected. So I know you're like, well, you want me to say something, but that's all I got. You know, God must have needed an angel, which is like horribly theologically, but I guess it's something, right? So what do we say? What do we say? Well, Joab says some important things. First of all, he reminds David that others are depending on him too. He says in verse 5, he reminds him, you got sons and daughters and wives and concubines. All these people are kind of depending on you, and you're just in here throwing yourself a pretty long pity party. You've lost a son, but you didn't lose everybody else. They still need a dad. They still need a husband. So you owe it to them to get up and do something. You're not being fair to them. They can't lose you too. And that's, sometimes you might have to say that if you're in the right relationship, hey, I know you're going through some hard times, but there are other people depending on you too, and it's good to remember them, and it might be cathartic just to be able to put your whole energy into also helping others. I found that in my life, that when I'm in myself and not in a good place, serving others has really, really been how God's used that to help me get out of that. You're like, well, Pastor, maybe don't go do death notifications, and you wouldn't go to those places. But he reminds David that others are depending on him too. He also tries to correct David's perspective. In valuing Absalom above everyone else, it makes it seem like he wishes that they all who had been his support team had died. That's not what David means. That's not what he means to communicate. But Joab says, this is the way it feels. Like they're more important, that he was more important than anybody else. Like put him on a scale and he outweighs everybody else in your life. Is that the way? That's the way this looks. He knows that David doesn't really think that way, but he gives him that view just to say, hey, there's more going on here than you realize. He also, in verse number 7, urges him to get up and work. He has duties as a king. Everyone needs to hear words of comfort from him. That's his job. He's the king, and people need to hear, hey, we're going to be okay. We get to go back to Jerusalem. Everything's going to be fine. Now, again, I'm not sure if when he says, I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, they will not tarry one with thee this night. I'm not sure if that's a threat. I kind of read that as a threat growing up, but now I just think it means like this could go really badly. Everyone could just go back and be like, well, we'll find some other leader when he's not, this week, because you need strong leadership. He says, so go and do something. He's at least reminding him what's at stake to get it right. You've probably seen parents who have lost a child, and then they mourn that child to the total neglect of all their other kids, and their kids feel that. That's important to keep in perspective. Joab says it in a really harsh way, we have to be gentler with those who are grieving. I'm almost done. What can we say to a grieving person? Here are some things you can say. 1, I can't imagine what you're going through right now. Right? Don't say, oh yeah, this exact thing happened to me. Like, you lost your husband, but I lost a dog once, and so I know exactly what you're going through. I know it sounds right in your head, and maybe even when you say it, you think you're being really helpful, and probably the person will have a little bit of grace with you, but just don't say that. Don't say, I know exactly what you're going through, because you don't. You can say, like, I can't imagine the pain you're going through right now. You can say, you must be really hurting, and I'm really sorry. We can also ask how we can help. And if they don't know, then we can do something for them. Let me bring you a meal. Let me help you clean. Let me just sit with you for a while. When I've done a death notification or been invited to go to a place where they just lost somebody, I start to ask them, tell me about your son, tell me about your mom, tell me about whoever, and then they kind of just paint a picture, and that helps them contextualize what's going to happen moving on, because they're going to remember those good things, and when they start talking with others, they've started to paint a picture of the story that they're going to tell. I remember one guy that we met, his mom, he and his mom were up here fishing, and she just, in her bed, died. She was an older lady, and they didn't know it was coming. He didn't obviously know it was coming, but it wasn't like shocking. And he was broken up, and we were just saying, tell us about your mom. And he's like, oh man, she caught this huge fish yesterday, and she was feeling great, and then she went to bed, and she passed away. And me and some of the EMTs that were there were like, well, I know this is hard for you, but honestly, I think that's the way all of us would want to go. Catch a big fish and go to bed and don't wake up. And he was laughing. He's like, you know what? You're right. That is the way. And other people came in, and that's what he was telling people. He's like, yeah, she just caught this big fish and went to bed, and lucky her. And it's like, okay, that helps, Just tell me about this person. Tell me about what's going on. Tell me what you're thinking, and That's really helpful for people to talk about the person that they love, that they lost. 3, we can be quiet and wait, and that's probably the hardest thing to do. We hate the silence. That's when we feel like we need to be like, I know I shouldn't say anything, but time heals all wounds. No, I wasn't supposed to say that. Just let it be quiet. Just don't try to explain why it happened unless they want to talk. Again, if they're asking theological questions, answer theological questions. If they don't want to talk, that's okay. It's really, really okay. Be still and let them initiate when they want to talk. We can also encourage them to stay active in some way. The advice for depressed people is go do one thing. Wash the dishes. And if you can't do that, wash a dish. Make your bed. Do something. Go for a walk. Do something. Why? Well, part of it is the spiral that, if you say stay sedentary because you're sad, then you just kind of stay there and you spiral. When you are active, medical doctors tell us that's when you release endorphins, serotonin, dopamine. It reduces inflammation. It can help regulate your sleep cycle. All those things are if you just get going. So encourage someone to, hey, can we go for a walk? We don't have to talk. Just let's go for a walk. You can give them some kind of sense of control when they feel like they're at the mercy of everything. This is the one thing you can do. I want to encourage you that we can be used by God to help others in this journey of grief. Romans 12:15 commands the church, rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. We all like the first part, and rejoicing with other people when they're happy, that's great. What about the weeping with them that weep? We kind of just disappear when that comes up, and we shouldn't do that. If you've gone through it, let me just say that God's given you comfort to use to others. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 5 says this, blessed be God, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, and the God of all comfort, who comforteth us in our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also aboundeth by Christ. Great verses that say that God puts things in your life for reasons so that you can help others, because other people have to go through this and they just don't have the resources. Paul talks about, I don't want you to sorrow as those who have no hope. He's not saying don't sorrow. He's just saying there's a good way to do this, there's a bad way to do this. And we as Christians, having that hope, knowing who the Lord is, have a different way to grieve. And maybe that God would use you to help with that, whether it's delivering a message, walking through someone with the grieving process. And again, maybe this is a message that you're just going to file away, even for yourself. And I hope not. I hope it's not anytime soon that you have to hear the news of a lost loved one and have to walk through this. But if you do, just remember that there's a whole church full of people that love you. There's a God in heaven who has carefully crafted everything for your good and benefit, even things that don't feel like it. And that God has lessons in his word for us.